Hey, Thomas Allen with In-Fisherman. This is my friend Eric Allee with Eagle Claw, one of the biggest hook brains I've ever dealt with. We're going to run a several part series talking about hooks, and that's not a super sexy topic until you listen to the man with the beard start talking about it, because there is so much that goes into hook development, so many choices to make. We want the next several videos, the next couple minutes to, I guess, enlighten you on picking the right hook for the right application, and there's so many to choose from. Where do you start? This first time, we're going to talk about soft plastics. Yep. We've spent some time doing that the last couple days. I feel like I've got a better grip on it than ever before, but picking a hook for a soft plastic is not as easy as just grabbing a hook out of the box and hooking it up. Where do you start?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes to everything. It's not a super sexy topic, but once you dig into it, the value is there, right? So when you're talking about soft plastics, there's a couple things that you want to consider. First would be the gap that you need. Is it a bulky bait? Is it a slender bait? The hook choices are going to be different. I know a lot of folks out there, they'll go, I'm EWG for everything. And I would argue, until the cows come home, there's a right hook for a presentation. It starts for me with the gap. So bulky soft plastic will use an EWG style hook. Let me grab one of these bad boys out of the package. And a couple things to consider. So if you look at the hook point going down to the line tie, they're almost perfectly in line.
Sure.
And I've got my big sausages in the way there. But what you get with this is you get a completely weedless presentation, and it's pretty effortless to get that. But the big deal with an EWG, when these were developed, it was to facilitate bulkier soft plastics.
Like a tube.
Tube, perfect. Perfect example of that. That's where this hook is really going to shine. So if you're pitching a tube in super dense vegetation, this is one of the hooks that you're going to rely on. Beaver style baits, that's another one. It's a bulkier style bait. You need that gap to facilitate good hook sets, and what I mean by that is the bite. So when the soft plastic collapses, you don't have the entire gap. You have the bottom of the the top of the soft plastic up to the point. That's going to be your bite area. And if you're using a hook with a smaller gap, the percentages are going to go way down.
Because the plastic is actually filling that gap that you need to use to get penetrated through the fish's mouth. So that's when an EWG comes in very handy. That's
when you're cooking them with peanut oil with this particular hook. But this is, we talked about it on the water, this is like Robitussin of the 90s for a lot of people. This is the hook that they use for absolutely everything. And I'm not saying you're not going to catch fish, but are you going to catch all the fish that you can? Are you going to be your best?
As we discovered yesterday, we were spending time fishing in not necessarily dense weeds, but it was the kind of thing where you could work a relatively weedless pattern through, but not totally weedless. Now, if you get into a situation where you're dealing with very dense moss or coontail that we have up here, things like that, this is almost as weedless as a bait can be with this type of hook. There are other options, of course, but the way that bend creates the 90-degree turn, you can almost put the hook back into inside the plastic effortlessly.
So, and this is one of those things where I'm going to give you all the information that I can, but where there's a yin, there's also a yang, and I'm going to kind of share that with all the hook styles, so the folks watching this can make an educated choice on the hook they want to use.
When to use it and when not to use it.
Yeah, so one of the things, like we talked about, bulkier soft plastics, it's going to be extremely, extremely weedless. But if you look at the thing that makes it extremely weedless, it's also the thing that can be problematic if you're not using the right soft plastic. The line tie and the hook point are perfectly in line. So your hookup ratio, it's built out of necessity is the best way to say it. Your hookup ratio for a slender soft plastic, I would argue, is better with another hook. Bulky soft plastics, you have to use it, you have to have the gap size, but there's a lot of folks that'll fish a Cinco style worm or something like that on an EWG, and I would argue that there's better options for it.
Well, and we're going to get into that, but so give me a simple do not use bait with an EWG and then an example of absolutely use it.
So a ribbon tail worm.
Okay.
Great example.
Standard 7-inch Berkeley power worm like we used yesterday.
So I would argue till the cows come home, a traditional style worm hook, which would be an offset, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's a better hook for that. You hit the nail on the head. A tube, a tube cross, something like that. The EWG, that's where you should be with that.
Well, so have some handy. Eagle Claw has a ton of sizes, and we can talk more about this. This is going to be a later installment where we discuss the trocar blade, if you will, compared to the laser sharp. We're going to get into that some more, but having a couple options handy is pretty important. So we talked about big plastics, why an EWG is important. You mentioned worms. Let's talk about worms and using the right hook for a slender bait.
So slender soft plastics, the old school round bend style hook is optimal. I mean,
it's my go-to for worms today. Like that, and it might be old school, but I know that it works.
Well, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why it's such an old school style that it's stuck around, because it flat out works. And to point a couple things out with the round bend style. So up top right here, if you look at the hook point, and then you look at the line tie right here, they're offset.
Yep.
And what that offset's going to do is when you reel down and you put the wood to them, this hook point has got a lot higher percentage of catching on the roof of the fish's mouth. And then if you look at the gap size, we talked about the gap size earlier. You don't need that big gap. Like a lot of times with that big gap, let's say you're dragging a worm or something like that, if the gap's too big, it could roll. It can lay down on its side, and that's sometimes where you'll end up tongue hooking fish. But there's a reason why it's been around forever. And you said old school. There's some things that just never go out of style.
And they don't need fixed, right? They work just fine. So when you talk gap, is there a measurement like to identify the gap, if you will, of a hook? Or are you looking at it going, okay, I know the worm, this hook looks right?
So an easy way to do it is take a soft plastic, and if you have double the gap, then you do the soft plastic.
Okay.
That's a pretty good gap that's going to help facilitate solid hookups.
Okay, that makes good sense.
Yeah, the round bend, and it's like we talked about yesterday. There's some things that just never, ever go out of style, and it's a round bend and a power worm.
But all of them are not created equal, and this is something you've helped me discover in the last couple of days, that you need to spend a little bit of time experimenting and focus on what you're feeling. And I've used an EWG hook, a light wire hook, for the wrong application. And the more fish you catch, the more time you spend on the water, you start to realize something's giving. There's a little bit of stretch somewhere. Is it the fluorocarbon? Is it the leader material? What is it that is causing what I feel to be very subtle split-second give? And I think what I experienced yesterday, it was the hook flexing in years past. So is there a leverage component to the way this is designed so that it pops quickly and keeps a fish pin? What's the secret that makes these hooks ideal for worms?
Well, when it comes to hook selection, I'm always going to go too deep. It's one of those things I can't help. But when it comes to hook selection, when you nail it, when it comes to the wire diameter, the gap, and everything else, it's gonna feel solid. It's gonna feel solid. So there is a little bit with the line tie and where the hook point's at. That's gonna be a part of what you're feeling too. But when you dial it in perfectly, whether you're talking light wire finesse hook or if you're talking a medium gauge worm hook, when it's dialed in perfectly, where you have the soft plastic, the line, the rod, the reel, like we had dialed in yesterday, it's gonna feel like you are perfectly connected.
Well, and this is what I'm talking about, especially when you set the hook on a lighter wire gauge hook. The hook will bend out along, it's a micro measurement.
Yeah.
But you can feel that a little bit in the way that the hook set is delayed. So that's why when I started switching to this style hook for worms, I found the hookup ratio is better, or whatever term you want to use. I felt more productive with that. And the other thing that I'll say, and again, there are plenty of applications, as you described, for an extra wide gap. When you're dealing with weeds like we were, this style hook catches far less weeds. So there's benefits across the board for different styles and different applications.
Yeah, and it's that thing. Try not to make hooks an afterthought, because when you put the time in it and you learn the little things that can change, like you're saying, when you used to feel a flex, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. When you reel down and you put the wood to a good one, you want to know that you've got everything lined up.
Confidence.
Starting with that hook, and it's when it's dialed in and when it's as it should be, like we felt yesterday, confidence goes through the roof.
That's right. Well, and this is perfect, right? This works in a lot of situations, but hey, we're humans, we're anglers, we're always looking to better something, to build a better mousetrap. And the Pro V bend is an example of something that I feel like is an advancement on an already effective round bend hook.
So a couple.
And we used the crap out of these the other day. They were awesome.
A couple things about the Pro V bend. To start, this is just me personally. If we offer it in a Pro V bend, I use it. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a finesse hook, if it's a worm hook, if we have it in a Pro V bend, I want to use it. And one of the things that you were feeling, let me get these bad boys off, is the Pro V bend. It actually strengthens the bend a little bit.
Let's compare those side by side.
So if you look at it, the gap's a little smaller on the Pro V bend, just the tiniest bit. But the Pro V bend, the biggest benefit of the Pro V bend is when you set the hook, it's going to funnel the fish down, and that point right there is going to lock them in. Legit, get a pair of pliers. You're going to need them to get them off. But the other thing that you kind of touched on right there, kind of a secondary benefit, is the Pro V bend actually strengthens that portion of the hook to where when you put the wood to them and you felt a little bit of flex before, the Pro V bend is going to add just a little bit more oomph to where it's one of those. I don't want to overhype it, but like I said, if I have that Pro V bend on any hook that I use, I have more confidence.
Well, I saw it firsthand. I think that it's fair to say there's nothing wrong with a round bend hook. You like that style. It's what you've been using. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you want to try something that's had a little bit more, I guess, technology jammed into it, some hey, how do we make this already awesome hook a little bit better? This is an option. So we used that yesterday at Weedy Bass Lake. We did not lose a single fish. And the cool thing about Trocar, and I know you've said you love Trocar, I love it because it drives a hook through that's sharp. The way the blade or the point of the hook is so sharp, it goes through some of the hardest parts of the fish. Whereas I think a lesser hook might have got turned and skinned hooked on the inside, which opens you to more thrown hooks. So this is an answer to that, and I know that this is not your entire product line in the Trocar soft plastic deal. I mean, especially when you get into different sizes. So we could go deep for hours here, but ultimately we want you to have an understanding why certain soft plastics require different hooks, and then different options within those lines. So talk a little bit here before we wrap this one up about selecting the right hook for the size of fish, maybe the type of structure that you're fishing, and granted, the size of the worm plays into which one you select here. But hey, I'm probably not taking this hook on a finesse worm to Mexico, right? Like, you're gonna have to make a different change for a bigger fish.
Yeah, I mean, just going back on something you said real quick with the Trocar point. It's a triple-sided point. I can get lost in the weeds talking about the technology behind it, but what I will say, me personally, I'm not the best angler in the world. There's times where I'm fishing and I'm thinking too deep and all the rest of the stuff, so I'm not in optimal hook setting position. This covers up a lot of what I don't do well and makes it look like I do it well. So that point is... I
need the same kind of help, so I'm grateful that you guys spend time thinking about that.
And then as far as selecting the right hook, you really got to think about the presentation first and foremost. Get that gap size right. The secondary thing you want to think about is the gauge of wire that you're going to use. Do you need a normal gauge wire? Do you need a mag wire? Because let's say Minnesota, let's talk about Minnesota. If you're fishing super, super thick vegetation, like you said, a finesse hook isn't going to work. So within our lineup or any hook, right, you're going to have different gauge wires that you can use. So get that. That's super, super important because you don't want the hook to flex, and you definitely don't want the hook to open up. And then the next thing that you talked about a little bit, sizing can really play an important role of getting the right hook. So you got to play around a little bit to get what I would call the optimal hook for each presentation.
Well, just as an example, we've done some drop shot work on Mille Lacs here in Minnesota, and as the season goes on, the summer gets hotter, the fish get more pressured, they tend to short strike. And we started putting a bigger hook into a drop shot bait that extended the hook back. Now, it definitely affected the bait action a little bit, but we caught more fish because as they were grabbing the back half of the worm, we had the hook point there. So that's just an experimental thing that I learned, that hey, if you're feeling bites, if you're missing bites, it's not necessarily because the hook's not making a good hook set, it's maybe because the fish aren't getting all the way up on the hook. So adapt and adjust to the bite, right? Find the right hook to match the plastic, to match the vegetation or the structure that you're fishing, and you're going to be more successful.
Dude, I love that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but you just said match the bite. Match the bite. In every aspect of fishing, that's what we do. That's our goal, right? It's like, okay, they're eating bait fish. I need to find a soft plastic or a hard bait that matches the profile. and we'll fine tune to the finest detail, adding little touches. But when it comes to a hook, we default. Talking about hook selection though, we want to educate as much as we can. Having great partners like you guys, it helps us do that. One of the things I'd really like to hammer home to the folks at home that are watching this, and to anybody that'll listen to me about it, is we work so hard as anglers for that one opportunity. And you don't know when it's going to be. You don't know when, whether it's a tournament fish, whether it's a PB bass, you don't know when you're going to get that opportunity.
Your kids first.
Yeah.
Lots of reasons to pay attention to these details.
If you short yourself on selection and you just go, and whenever I hear this, I feel like Ultimate Warrior. I want to jump off the top rope, 2 boots in the air. Whenever I hear it's just a fish hook, it's like, dude, no, it's the connecting point between you and your dreams.
Well, and that's the point that we hammer home at In-Fisherman, and I think, and it doesn't have to be just In-Fisherman, every fishing publication out there, their ultimate goal is to put you in position to catch more fish. And you know what, Eagle Claw Trocar, made in America, an extensive selection of hooks. Like, we won't have time to go through everything, but we're going to spend some time digging into some trends, talking about applications, making differentiations between certain styles for similar applications. But if people want to learn more, people want to dig into this extensive list, where can they go to figure this out?
Go to eagleclaw.com. Another thing, reach out to us on social, and of course the folks at In-Fish. I mean, you guys are such a valuable resource, and we want to help you. We want to meet you where you're at, and we darn sure want to make sure that we put the right hook in your hand.
Well, wherever your fish swim, there's a hook for that fish. We're going to learn more. Thanks for being here in this video. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up. Click the subscribe button down in the corner, and we'll see you right here on the next video.